Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The first thing you notice in my parents' kitchen is the smell pot roast and rendered onions, sweet cornbread shining under a brush of butter, something cinnamon cooling on the counter. Ruth and Walter Hart host the kind of Sunday potluck Tidewater families orbit around the kind, where everyone pretends they're not measuring one another's lives over the rims of sweet tea glasses. The windows were open to the February marsh, and the air carried a damp chill with it, the kind that makes the floorboards creak louder. I came early, like I always do, to help set out plates and warm rolls in the oven. Mason showed up a few minutes after me, hair still damp from a quick shower in that button-down I swear he keeps only for parental events. He kissed my cheek, hugged my mother, and drifted to the hallway to answer a text. Sloane arrived on his heels, a breath of cold air, in a cream sweater lip gloss catching the light. She came bearing a store-bought pie and an easy grin that fit every room she walked into. "I would have baked," she said, "but our kitchen is chaos." Long story. Long stories go with pot roast, Walter told her, carving meat like it was a sacrament. By the time we filled our plates, the dining room had warmed with bodies and talk. There's a certain choreography to the old house. My father at the head, my mother keeping small things in motion. Mason, somewhere between the two and me, anchored at the corner where I can see the whole table without being in the center of it. I listened to updates about a neighbor's goat and a cousin's promotion, people's laughter ricocheting off the beadboard. Outside the window, the creek behind the property glinted the color of coin metal, and gulls stitched invisible lines across the gray sky. Sloane cleared her throat with a small theatrical cough. "So," she said, bright as a morning show host, "we've had an adventure." The city inspector took one look at the paint chips coming off the trim in our duplex and said, "Nope, not with kids in the house. We're in lead remediation for best case 6 months, maybe less." She kept talking because that's what Sloane does when she needs momentum, a clean line through a complicated field. Mason nodded like the idea and the speech had not met before this moment. "It's a thing," he added, vague as fog. "We're fine, it's all fine." Sloane went on her fork, skating across the plate. "We just can't live there while they work, which fun involves tenting, and a lot of men in suits that look like they're going to the moon. Anyway," she laughed light and practiced. "We were talking with Ruth and Walter earlier." My mother's eyes darted to me, then to the butter dish. "And they reminded us, Sloane said that your little cottage on the bay is sitting empty for a spell. Such a shame. Truly gorgeous place. We could be out of your hair in 6 months, probably sooner. It's family, right? Why pay strangers for an Airbnb when we could watch over your place and keep the lights on?" She smiled, and I could see her reflection in the lacquered surface of the dining room table, perfect and small, as if improved by the finish. "The cottage." The word dropped like a shell on a porch. "The place isn't big, just 2 bedrooms and a galley kitchen that looks straight onto the dock. I bought it the spring I turned 47, the first thing in years that felt like mine, as opposed to something borrowed patched agreed to. We'd help with utilities, of course," Sloane added. "And we'd be out of the way. You hardly use it in the winter, do you?" Mason's napkin lay folded on his plate like a surrender flag. "It would really help us, Mom," he said, soft, almost embarrassed by the words. My father carved. The blade clicked against bone. He didn't look up. My mother, who cannot stand the taste of conflict, reached for the salt as if one more seasoning would steady the dish. I didn't say anything right away. That's not my first rodeo with requests that arrive in the wrapping of certainty. In my mind, I saw the tally. I never wrote down a camera lens I loaned to Sloane for an urgent shoot and had returned with a scratch so fine you only saw it when the sun caught glass. The cedar chairs I'd refinished one summer that moved to Mason's patio until the party, and were still there when hurricane season ended. The time I found my key in someone else's purse because we were rushing and I didn't want to wake you. These things live in the marrow until a single sentence shakes them loose. I set my fork down careful. "I do use it," I said, "just not with an audience." Sloane laughed as if I'd made a joke. "We get that. We're quiet. We're respectful. Scout's honor." "I was never a scout," I said, and smiled to take the hard edge off it. Mason's gaze slid to the window. The gulls from earlier were gone, leaving an open, colorless strip of sky. He cleared his throat. "It's temporary. We don't want to put you out." "You wouldn't," my mother chimed in a little too quickly. "It's family." I thought about the cottage in winter, the way the space keeps its own counsel, the clang of halyards somewhere up the creek, the pilled wool blanket on the love seat, the list thumbtacked over the kitchen counter notes about repairs and paint samples, practical little hopes that add up to a life. I pictured the dockboards softening with frost and the white permit paper I had taped there last weekend to remind myself of things that need doing. Not a secret, not a threat. Just an unromantic fact places have rules same as people. 6 months, Sloan said, again sweetening the number. We'd be out by the 4th, if not June. My father finally looked up. His eyes went from me to the roast to the window, making that triangular journey old men make when they want the room to fill the silence for them. He didn't speak. He's an old waterman who believes in reading a tide instead of talking at it. I reached for my glass. The tea had collected a drift of ice, thin and dangerous, and the lemon slice had sunk to the bottom. I swallowed something colder than the room. I'm hearing you, I said. I am. Sloan nodded, smile still pinned in place, waiting for a yes like folks wait for a toast. I glanced at the time on my phone and reflexively the calendar beneath it. Colored blocks laid out my week in calm little rectangles. My work deadlines, my mother's physical therapy, the morning I'd planned to drive out to the cottage to check on the pipes. In the center of the month, a single starred note I had added with my own hand. No audience, no pressure, no witnesses, because if you don't write down what you want, other people will. I set the phone face down. I'll think about it, I said. That means I'll actually think. I kept my voice level and unhurried, the way you talk to a skittish animal or a storm. And I'll get back to you. Mason nodded, relief visible, like someone had taken a weight from his chest. Sloan launched into a fresh paragraph about lead dust and protective suits, how silly the city could be, how responsible they are. I let the words pass. I passed the cornbread. I asked my father about his boat. The moment moved on outwardly the way moments do when everybody decides they'd rather taste cinnamon than conflict. After dinner, I carried plates to the sink and stood with my hands in warm water, looking through the window at the marsh grass bent by the tide. My mother came to dry, chin lifted as if bracing for a breeze. They're in a bind, she murmured. People are often, I said. She folded a towel that didn't need folding. You've always had a generous heart. I have a house, I said, steady, and it has walls. She kissed my cheek the way she did when I was little, and she didn't have a better sentence. Then she went to find the pie knife. When I put on my coat, the old porch boards answered with their familiar song. In the yard, the branches underscored the late afternoon with a sound like two hands rubbed together for warmth. I breathed in the brackish air and felt it settle something in me, the boundary between what's mine and what isn't, between kindness and confusion. I unlocked my car, sat, and watched my breath fog the glass. Then I spoke aloud to make it real enough for my own ears. Let's do this the right way, I said, with a plan and a paper trail. I turned the key. The engine caught. The tide kept its hour. By morning, the cold had sharpened. I brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in it and laid out what I needed on the kitchen table. A roll of blue painter's tape, a stapler, a thick black marker, a folder of printouts with county seals repeating like coins. On top, I set the two sheets that mattered most. Dock replacement permit and septic system replacement. Notice white paper that looked harmless until you read the paragraphs in fine type about no occupancy during construction and inspection windows. The language was dry enough to crack, which is how these things should be. The road to the bay threads through pines and low fields patched with frost. My tires hummed a consistent note, and somewhere beyond the tree-lined gulls worked the air like a seamstress works a hem. When I turned into the narrow lane to the cottage, the marsh answered with a smell that can't be faked. Brackish water silt, cold wood. The little house sat square to the creek shutters latched tight, the dock a gray finger in winter light. I killed the engine and listened before I moved. The quiet out there has a shape. It holds. I taped the septic notice to the back door, first eye level, centered the kind of placement you can't pretend you didn't see. Then I carried a hand drill and the dock permit to the piling at the head of the walkway. 4 screws later, the board was official in the only way that matters. It had a number the county could look up and a line for the inspector's initial. I stepped back and wrote with the marker construction area, authorized personnel only. Footsteps approached through grass. That's a serious sign for a sweet little place, a voice called. It was Derek Alvarez, coat open to the cold, a leash looped around his wrist, with a patient brown dog at the other end. He lives year-round across the creek in a house raised on pilings and common sense. He used to show up in turnout gear when other people's worst days started. These days, he walks, fixes things that break, and keeps a casual eye on the water like it's a friend who sometimes acts up. County likes the pageantry, I said. Keeps everyone honest. He squinted at the placard. Septic and dock in the same season. You're ambitious. Timing lined up, I said, and it keeps people from treating the place like a guest room. He nodded. Clarity is a kindness. Want me to be your second pair of eyes? I'm out here at odd hours. I'm putting in cameras, I said, holding up a small box. But having a neighbor who notices things never hurt. We walked the dock together, boards groaning under us, the creek moving slow as heavy glass below. At the end, I pointed to the split piling that had started this whole decision. Storms keep trying to take a piece, I said. They're patient, he answered. So are we. Back at the door, I installed the smart deadbolt I'd brought, the kind that logs entries by code and timestamps each one. It clicked with a clean confidence. I set a temporary contractor code, then mounted 2 small cameras under the eaves, one catching the drive, one the back steps and door. I paired them with my phone, named them with dull labels, and watched a grainy live view of my own back pocket for a second. When they settled, a small green icon in my palm told me the place could speak even when I wasn't here. Inside, the house smelled like coal dust and last week's lemon oil. I ran water a minute to keep the lines honest and left the heat at a low setting so the pipes wouldn't complain. Then I set a clipboarded visitor log on the kitchen counter, date name, purpose signature old-fashioned to the point of stubbornness. My phone rang while I was staging a plastic runner for muddy boots. The screen said, County Environmental Health. I answered with hands still dusty. "This is Caldwell," the voice said, brisk and awake without sounding caffeinated. Inspector Caldwell sounded like people who don't raise their voices because they never have to. "I've got your permit numbers in front of me. You're scheduling septic replacement and dock work. I want to confirm your inspection windows." We went over dates the way a nurse goes over medicine. Septic rough-in inspection, she said I can give you Tuesday between 9 and noon. Dock pilings prelim set 2 Thursdays from now afternoon. Your contractors on both jobs carry current COI. Certificates are in the folder, I said, hand on the paper as if she could see it through the line. "I'll email copies after we hang up." "Good. 2 reminders." Her tone had clipped kindness. 1, no occupancy. With septic disturbed, that's not a suggestion. 2 post-visible notices. If someone is living here, I have to issue a stop work, and you lose your place in queue. Nobody likes the paperwork that follows. Understood. She paused. This creek runs slow. Smell can linger in a bad dig. Give your people room to do it right. Room is the plan, I said. We ended the call, and before I could second-guess the phrasing, I drafted the email that had been writing itself in my head since last night. Subject notice, Rebay Cottage permits and access. I kept the sentences plain. Mason Sloan. The cottage is under permitted work for septic replacement and dock repair. County requires no occupancy during these phases. I've posted the notices and set limited access for contractors' inspections only. If you have questions about code or schedule, the attached permits have contact info for contractors and Inspector Caldwell. E. I attached PDFs, typed each name correctly, and copied Ruth and Walter, because family gossip loves the places where facts leave gaps. Then, for the sake of people who swear they never saw an email, I wrote the same content as a letter, printed 2 copies on thick paper, and slid them into certified mail envelopes. The small green cards, return receipt requested, felt steady as pocket change in my hand. By midday, the workers from Tidewater Septic Solutions arrived to walk the yard with flags like they were laying out a parade route. They took pictures and spoke in measurements, and one of them told me with a kind of pride that the old tank was from a manufacturer you can't find anymore unless you're excavating. I introduced them to the visitor log and showed them the code for the back door. They didn't care about the house except as a path to the work, which is exactly the way I like professionals to be. After they left, I drove into town to drop the certified letters at the post office. The woman behind the counter stamped each form with a thunk that made something in me unclench. When I stepped back to the sidewalk, my phone buzzed Ruth. "I got your email," she said. "You're being very thorough. It saves explanations later. Walter says to ask if you want him to look at the dock before they set pilings. Tell him I'd like his eyes on it after the prelim," I said. "He sees angles I miss." She exhaled. Sloan came by with the pie dish. "She's very composed." "She's good in a room," I said. She asked if you'd decided, Ruth added. I told her you're handling it. "That's true." Back at the cottage, Derek had left a note on my door in neat block letters. "Saw 2 unfamiliar cars on the lane around noon, turn before your drive. Plates looked like rentals. Dog says hi." He'd added his number at the bottom with a small arrow pointing to it as if numbers get shy in cold weather. I dialed and thanked him. "Probably the septic crew," I said. "But I appreciate you noticing." "I tend to notice," he said. "Old habit. If I see anything else, I'll jot it down real time." I stood at the threshold a long minute before locking up part inventory, part weather report, part something else I don't have a name for. The cameras showed a fixed view of ordinary things, a ruffle of grass, the side of my car, the edge of my boot when I stepped back. Inside, the visitor log waited with blank lines, expectant as a schoolbook. I straightened the permits again, a pointless gesture that felt like smoothing a collar before walking on stage. On my way out, I stopped by my parents' place to return the casserole dish from last night. Walter was in the yard with a coil of rope he'd pretended not to retire years ago. He looked at the dish, then at me, then past me in the direction of the creek none of us could see from here. "You put your name on things," he said without asking, in letters 2 inches high. "Good," he said. He took the dish with both hands as if it were heavier than it looked. Ruth opened the storm door. Stay for coffee, she asked. I've got to get back, I said. Contractors like clear instructions more than they like chit-chat. People do too, she said, a small smile stitched into the words. By late afternoon, the sky flattened the color of unpolished steel. I walked the interior of the cottage one last time. Kitchen sitting room, the smaller bedroom with the quilt I'd pieced together from shirts I no longer wear. I unplugged the string of fairy lights I let myself keep up in winter, folded it around my hand like soft wire, and tucked it in a drawer. The radiator knocked twice in the corner, reminding the room that heat has its own language. At the back door, I slid the visitor log into a plastic sleeve and taped it down so no one could claim it went missing. I tested the lock, then tested it again to hear the internal bolt settle. The camera's tiny status light stared without blinking, patient as a lighthouse. When I stepped off the porch, the tide had turned. The creek ran a little faster, shrugging at the pilings, adjusting to what the day required. I pulled the gate shut and felt the latch catch in the cold. Then I walked to the car and sat until the windshield stopped clouding my hands quiet on the wheel, the permits crisp in their sleeves behind me, the house saying nothing and meaning it. The first alert hit my phone just after 8 motion, on the drive the camera's narrow bell pinging my pocket like a polite cough. I was already on the road with a thermos and the folder of permits riding shotgun. When the lane opened to the marsh, I saw the square blue nose of a moving truck idling by the split-rail fence hazard lights pulsing a steady orange heartbeat into the gray morning. 2 men in company jackets stood at the back among straps and quilts, studying a paper manifest as if it might change its mind. The taller one lifted a hand when he saw me. Morning, he said, voice bodied by cold air. We've got a delivery for this address. You've got the right place, I said. Wrong timing. I held up the sheet protector with the septic replacement notice like a passport. Active work, no occupancy. County will stop everything if anything crosses that door. He studied the page, then the visitor log taped behind the glass. We just need a signature, he tried, or a refusal. Either way, we gotta mark the call. I'll sign a refusal, I said, and I'll pay for a reconsignment if you can drop it at public storage off Route 10. I'll call ahead and open a unit. He thought 3 seconds longer than most people give themselves. You got a name on the order, he asked, tapping the manifest. I read it, M. Hart, S. Whitaker. The kind of slash that suggests a conversation you weren't invited to. They're family, I said. But this house is a work site. I offered the pen I keep in the folder pocket, the one that writes through carbon copies like it means it. You'll need proof we turned you. He handed me the manifest. I wrote refused at door per posted permit and signed with my full name, the same shape my hand learned in 4th grade. Give me 20 minutes, I added. I'll get you a storage unit number. By the time I finished with the storage office first month, paid gate code unit lock, waiting in a plastic bag at the counter, the septic crew's pickup had swung into the yard with the self-confidence of people who work with machines bigger than cars. Flags went out like stitches across the grass, long reels of caution tape unfurling in yellow cursive. The crew chief, a woman in a knit cap whose cheeks had the color of work and cold, introduced herself as Trina and showed me the diagram she'd marked in Sharpie. We'll trench here, she said, drawing a clean line with her glove. Tanks there. Leach field's tired. We'll keep your azalea if we can. I appreciate the mercy, I said. The moving truck rolled off with a slow, careful sigh of gears. The driver saluted through the windshield. I lifted my phone and sent 1 email and 2 texts, one to the address from the manifest attaching a PDF of the refusal one to Mason and Sloan, with a photo of the posted permit and a very plain sentence, delivery redirected to storage, receipt attached, contact the carrier for access. Then I put my phone face down on the hood and watched the first shovel bite the ground. Dirt talks. When the bucket hits it, a tore-up zipper sound, a soft groan as the earth gives the scraped metal complaint of stone. The smell comes up before the hole gets honest wet sour, like a cellar with secrets. I stood close enough to hear the blade, but far enough that I wasn't pretending I knew how to help. Derek walked over with a 5-gallon cooler and a cardboard tray of coffees balanced in one hand. His dog curled into the wind like a comma at his heel. Brought truce offerings, he said. Good timing, Trina told him, taking a cup with her name already on it. You're a saint. I'm retired, he said. I get bored. At 10:12, my phone pinged again. Ruth Sloan stopped by with the pie dish. She saw the truck on the road. Is everything all right? Yes, I wrote. Delivery refused, redirected to storage, work started, signs are up. No flurry back, just an answered bubble, and then the small gray ellipsis that said she was discouraged by words being harder than cinnamon pie. I pocketed the phone, and when I looked up, Inspector Caldwell's white county sedan turned into the lane with the precision of someone who has never enjoyed a shortcut. She stepped out with a clipboard that matched her voice, efficient, and boots that told you she expected to stand in something she didn't plan to take home. You're the owner, she said as a statement, not a question. She looked at the inked numbers on the notices, then at the trench starting to define itself. Walk me through where you're putting the new tank. Trina did the talking. Caldwell checked off boxes, asked one question about setbacks, one about the dock schedule, and a third about traffic on the lane. When she finished, she initialed the posted inspection board with a small square signature, a mark I could have recognized from 50 feet. You're signed for rough-in Tuesday, she said. You know the no occupancy provision as well as I do. I've posted it where no one can pretend not to see, I said. She nodded once. If anyone insists on pretending, call the office. I prefer paper to rumor. Then almost as an afterthought, don't stand downwind when they pop the lid. Noted, I said. She left with no more ceremony than she'd arrived. By midday, the tank lay exposed like a fossil concrete flaking in tired petals where the lid had cracked years earlier. Trina's crew cordoned off the area with more tape and stacked square pallets under a tarp like gift boxes no one should open. The house looked tinier with the yard rearranged for operations like a well-behaved child standing among adult tools. A text from Mason landed with the clumsy earnestness of someone who hates the interface. Saw your message. Thanks for the info. We'll get the storage key sorted, I answered. Ask for unit 217. I paid the first month. Then because saying it plain sometimes keeps people from reading their own music between the notes, I added, this is a work site. He wrote back a single thumbs up, no words. I felt the distance between that icon and his actual hand. I didn't hear from Sloan directly. Instead, Ruth called around too, with a quiet, embarrassed sound. She posted something online. She said low enough you might mistake it for a draftsman's whisper. People have opinions. I opened my browser and found it a photo she'd taken from the road earlier truck lights, flaring a sliver of yellow tape visible in the corner. The caption read like a complaint, filed with an audience. Imagine having a second home sit empty for months and telling your family they can't use it because of permits. There were hashtags and a handful of comments using words like gatekeeping and control, plus a few that told her to get a grip. I took screenshots and sent them to myself, and then let the app slide off my thumb. The camera pinged twice more workers crossing the frame, the shadow of a gull thrown huge against the door, and then settled into a rhythm the day could hum to. The dock crew arrived after lunch, a flatbed stacked with pilings, a small crane riding behind it like a stubborn mule. They set orange cones without waiting to be asked and walked the boards tapping with mallets the way doctors tap knees. One of them found my permit board and traced the inspector's initials with a dirty glove, pleased by the order of things. I stood back and watched them unfasten the first run of decking screws, popping one by one with small silver squeals. The board lifted and winter water showed its dark grin. With that single motion, the cottage lost a way of being used. It had held since long before it knew me. Derek whistled low. There goes the easy path, he said. Temporary. I answered, though the word didn't sit comfortably in my mouth. The air smelled like wet rope and iron. He stayed a while, keeping an eye on cars turning off the main road and turning back when they saw the machines. At one point, a sedan slowed hard enough to make gravel voice its complaint. Through the windshield, I recognized Ruth's hat. She parked by the fence and walked up, skirt flapping against her knees, in gusts, one hand on her head to keep the hat from leaving her. Thought I'd bring cookies, she said, lifting a tin in proof. And ask you in person if you're... She stopped there the way a person stops before a doorstep during a storm. I'm busy, I said, but not as a dismissal. I gestured to the chaos that had replaced our quiet. They are too, she nodded. We stood watching the crane lift the second section of board water, slapping the pilings with a tighter sound now that the wind had clocked north. Sloan is upset, she said, finally recognizing the configuration where saying nothing would be a lie. She's allowed to be, I answered. So are septic systems, and inspectors, and physics. Ruth's mouth tugged. You always did bring the practical to a party. I brought napkins, I said, and a pen. She opened the tin and handed Trina the first cookie as if paying toll. I'll stay out of the way, she said. We all did. The day shortened by degrees only a boatman and an inspector would notice. The crew set sawhorses across the dock opening with reflective tape hung between them like a smile. Someone cut wrong. The trench deepened edges squared by practiced hands. Visitor log lines filled Trina's print, a man named Oates from the dock company who drew a star where his signature would have been if he liked writing. Mid-afternoon. The moving truck driver texted me a photo of a closed roll-up door with 217 stenciled in white and the contract number scrawled on blue tape. Delivered. Clerk has paperwork, he wrote. Good luck with your project. Thanks for doing it right, I replied. He sent back a single no problem as plain as a handshake. I didn't see Mason until almost 4. His car slid into the lane too fast and then braked when he saw the world he knew had been reorganized. He got out and stood in the road a moment with his hands in his pockets, the posture of a man who wants to claim his body knows what to do, even if his mind hasn't agreed. He nodded to Trina, to Oates, to Derek, to the machines, the general bow of someone entering a space where everyone else has a job. You redirected the delivery, he said to me. I refused it, I said. They offered a redirect. I paid the first month at the storage place so nothing sits out in the weather. He watched the crane swing aboard to the flatbed. I'll get the key. Clerk has your name. He nodded, then hesitated, then tried again. She didn't mean to make it ugly. The post, he said, not meeting my eye. She's just loud when she thinks she's right. Most of us are, I said. A backhoe clanked behind us, saving us from saying more. He flinched at the sound and then grinned at himself for flinching. I told her it's your place, he managed. I told her code is code. Trina appreciates that sentence. I glanced over to catch her smirk. So does the county. He exhaled a little laugh that sounded like his childhood sneaking back for a second. You always liked a form. I like things with dates and signatures, I said. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets as wind snapped the caution tape. I'm going to grab the storage paperwork, he said. We've got some folks who can help move the heavier stuff tomorrow. He paused as if he'd stepped off a board that wasn't there anymore. Not here, he added quickly. At the unit. Good, I said. It didn't feel like a victory or a loss. It felt like a sentence we both understood. He left with a two-finger wave for Derek and the dog. Ruth stayed another half hour distributing cookies to men who had perfected eating while standing. When she finally turned toward her car, she touched my sleeve 2 fingers, a mother's whisper of contact, then let go. By late day, the dock opening yawned like a missing tooth, a rectangle of water where boards had been. The trench wore an orange snow fence around it, top line flicking in the wind like a ticker. The hole to the old tank was now a neat cube, edges clean ladder sunk into it like an exclamation. I signed the daily log. Trina held out and initialed next to the timestamp where Caldwell had written her square hand. The light went grainy. The crew packed with the choreography of people who have done the same dance on 50 different lawns. I walked the small rooms before I left, not as a farewell, but as a roll call. The kitchen held its breath. The chair by the window kept its dent. A faint vibration came through the floorboards from the crane's last hiss of hydraulics, and then the sense of stillness returned, the kind that shares a wall with work. When I stepped onto the back stoop, the sawhorses threw long stripes across the yard. I pulled the gate shut and felt the latch drop with the wooden seriousness of a barn. The cameras pushed a final alert I didn't need. The permits, slick in their sleeves, caught the last light and refused to look glamorous. I locked the door. I touched the frame where paint had worn down to wood at hip height, the place every house puts its handprint on the people who live in it. Then I crossed the yard boots, finding new ruts where the machines had argued with earth, and got into the car. Behind me, the creek moved with the small authority it keeps even in winter. Ahead of me, the lane opened toward the road where red taillights already stitched a thin line through evening. I eased the car into first, and as the tires rolled, I felt the knowledge settle, the kind that doesn't need a speech, that the house had crossed over into a different kind of day. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together. 2 afternoons after the septic crew stitched the yard with orange flags, my phone popped with the sharp chime the cameras use when they want attention. Back steps motion. A second later, back door incorrect code. Attempt blinked across the screen. The thumbnail showed the cream cuff of a sweater and a hand testing the knob like it might give if spoken to softly. I put the call through to the door speaker before the next attempt could register. This property is under inspection, I said, voice steady in my own ear. Leave the site. Sloane's face tilted up into the lens, startled by how close the camera was. Ellie, it's me, she said, breath quick in the cold. I just need to grab a couple things. The crib screws, Mason thinks we left them here. Contractors only, I said. No occupancy, no entry. I'm not trying to live here, she said, palm open to the camera. 5 minutes. Across the frame, a shape moved. Derek jacket unzipped, dog at heel. The kind of easy stride men get when they've already done their running. He lifted a hand and spoke at Sloane from a comfortable distance, the way you address someone on a dock who might step wrong if you shout. You can't be on the porch, he said. Active permits. You're on camera. Sloane's mouth went tight. I see that, she said, and looked up at me again. I'll call you. Do that, I answered, off-site. They backed away, the dog first. Polite, then Derek, then Sloane, until the porch was just wood and winter light again. The incorrect code alert faded and left the ordinary rectangle of my phone screen. A minute later, Mason called. I told her not to go, he said without preface. She said it would be quick. Quick is still entry, I said. I know. His voice found a lower gear. Can we talk somewhere neutral? We picked the brew pub on the river, the one with a picture window over the water and a chalkboard that lists oysters by creek like they're ball players. I took a table near the corner where I could see the door, a habit I don't apologize for. The room smelled like malt and salt and something blackened on cast iron. On the floor, a wet map of boot prints dried into nothing. Sloane arrived first, hair caught up winter red at the cheeks. Mason came in after her and touched my shoulder as if to anchor the room. We skipped the waitress's first pass and let the empty tabletop be our shared object. I shouldn't have tried the door, Sloane said, not waiting for ceremony. I panicked. The remediation crew moved up their start date. They taped plastic over our bedroom and the boys' room. There's dust and warning tape, and I needed the crib hardware out of my head. The hardware isn't there, I said. I would have seen it packing the tools. I know that, she said, impatient with herself as much as with me. I know. She broke off and pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. I was loud online this week. I shouldn't have been. I didn't make her name the posts. I had muted them the way you mute a car alarm in a neighborhood, because the sound isn't useful and it frays the day. It complicates things, I said. Mason leaned forward, elbows on wood, hands linked. We put you in a corner, he said, eyes steady on mine. Mom, I'm sorry. The waitress came back and we let her do the small warming human things. Water, a plate of fries, a basket of hush puppies everyone swore they wouldn't eat and then did. Sloane wrapped her hands around her glass like it was a heat source. I set a manila folder on the table and slid it so they could both see without feeling cornered. On top were the certified mail receipts with the green cards clipped, then the permit copies, then a 1-page printout where I'd underlined no occupancy and stop work order in clean strokes. Nothing theatrical, just text that held its own shape. If the inspector sees evidence of people staying, I said she's obligated to halt work and pull us from the queue. That drifts everything. Dock septic insurance contractors. Not a threat. A sequence. Mason nodded once, a real nod, not the agreeable hum I've seen on his face since kindergarten. Understood. Sloane stared at the underlines as if they might rearrange. When the moving truck came, you redirected our stuff to storage. Her voice kept level by thin effort. You paid for months. I paid for 3, I said. It kept the truck out of the yard and kept everyone from pretending the house was staging for a move-in. You have the receipts. I do, she said. A beat passed. Thank you. We're not destitute, Mason added quick, like he needed the sentence to exist. We weren't trying to make you a landlord. I know, I said. Sloane's stare softened from the paper to me. My client canceled the spring shoot, she said. Budgets are weird and A breath reclaimed mid-sentence. I'm not great at asking for things that don't cost someone else. Online is easier because you shout into a room and the room shouts back and you can pretend it's not a person on the other end. This town doesn't do anonymous rooms, I said. It does docks and porches and people who remember. She smiled without enjoying it. So noted. The waitress slid the fries between us like a peace offering. Salt and heat rose up and made the table friendlier than it had any business being. Mason reached for one, then pulled his hand back. We need to make this right, he said. You're going to make it quiet, I said. Sloane nodded. I've already deleted the posts. Her phone buzzed on the table and she turned it face down. I'll tell people I exaggerated, or I won't tell them anything. We're going to keep you off the property, I said. That's the main point. She looked at the window instead of at me. The river in late afternoon is all pewter and edited sky. I can agree to that. I'll do something on my side, I said, and watched Mason's shoulders tense, then release when I kept going. 2 weeks at River's Edge extended stay paid in full. It's near the boys' school and not miserable. After that, it's yours to carry. Ellie Mason began half gratitude, half refusal. 2 weeks, I repeated, not a syllable more. Sloane scraped back a strand of hair with one finger, a tell of relief she didn't name. In exchange for 3 things, I said, and laid them out like cards. 1, no entry to the cottage or the yard by you or anyone you dispatch. 2, no online chatter about the situation. No innuendo, no captions that make sport of it. 3, 1 point of contact, Mason, so I'm not answering 2 voices at cross purposes. Mason looked at Sloane. She held his gaze longer than I'd seen her hold still all week. Done, he said. Sloane added quietly, done. I pulled a half sheet from the folder, 2 paragraphs I'd typed that morning, because it helps me to see words sit on paper, and turned it toward them. It wasn't a contract and didn't pretend to be just terms summarized in plain English with a space to initial. Sloane let out a breath that made a small cloud on the glass of the window. She took the pen I slid across and signed with her neat looping name. Mason added his, a simpler set of letters. I'll email you the reservation confirmation, I said. Check-ins after 3. Sloane's eyes flicked up water bright and stubbornly dry. Thank you, she said, not expansive, not performative. Just the words and the air around them. We ate fries we didn't need, and the hush puppies disappeared as if someone had tipped the basket. The waitress cleared the plates and left a smear of ketchup the shape of a small state. We let it stay. Mason reached into his back pocket and took out a small stack of receipts, gas storage grocery, bound with a paperclip that had been rescued from a paperwork avalanche. These are ours, he said, tapping them. I'm not offering them to be reimbursed. I want you to see that we're not leaning. I see it, I said. He tucked them away again like a card trick completed. On the sidewalk outside, a gull lifted and wrote its name across the gray air. Sloane stood chair legs, whispering against old wood. "I'm going to pick up the boys," she said to Mason. "I'll meet you at home." "Okay," he said, and she left him with me in the square of quiet people make when they don't want to crowd a moment. He looked older than he had at Sunday dinner, but in an earned way, like wood that's been oiled and knows its grain. "I hate that it got this far," he said. "It got as far as it needed to," I answered. He nodded once, the real nod again. "I'll keep it quiet." "Keep it clean," I said. We paid adding too much tip because it felt like a tax we owed the room for letting us use it like a courthouse. Outside, the wind off the river had an iron taste. Mason hugged me quick and unfussy and walked toward his car with his shoulders square. I took the long way back past the turn for the cottage without letting the wheel lean that way past the bait shop with the crooked open sign, past the church where the parking lot always looks like a diagram on Sundays and a rumor the rest of the week. At a light, my phone chimed a camera heartbeat, the ordinary kind, just wine teasing the marsh grass into motion. I let it go. The permits were on their nails. The visitor log sat on the counter, and the door had remembered how to hold. The river ran its colorless evening, changing without fuss. Inspector Caldwell pulled up in a county sedan under a sky the color of rinsed steel. She stepped out with a clipboard and a pen tied to it by a length of twine, practical as a harbor knot. "Hart," she said, and I walked her through the yard, stitched with the last of the orange flags. At the septic lid, she knelt, peered, and made small notes with a neat hand. "Lines are clean. Bedding looks right. No gray water smell." At the crawl space, she shone a light and listened the way people listen to engines and newborns. Back by the dock, she tested the pilings with a mallet measured taps that traveled through wood into water like a message. She signed both forms with the kind of pressure that leaves a mark on the sheet below, then pressed a past stamp in red that bloomed like a seal. "You kept it orderly," she said, not as a compliment so much as a fact entered into the record. "Tell your crew to pull the fencing by week's end and take down the authorized personnel boards." "I'll handle the boards," I said. The septic crew rumbled in to collect hoses and flags. The dock team stacked spare lumber and coiled a rope that had remembered its curve from some other boat. One of the carpenters ran his palm along the new railing and nodded satisfied like men are when lines meet where they're supposed to. When the yard cleared, I took a driver and backed out the screws I'd sunk 2 weeks earlier. The permit board came free with a small sigh. I carried it to the shed and leaned it in the corner paper facing the wall. My phone buzzed. "Sloane, thank you for River's Edge. Boys slept. We're okay. I took everything down. I'm sorry for the noise." A second message followed. "We'll stay off the lane. Promise. No flourishes, no captions, just text," that sat plainly in the light. Later, Mason drove up and parked at the road as if proximity itself needed permission. He walked in with an envelope and a spool of quiet. "For storage," he said, handing me a check for the first month and a note that broke the rest into equal parts. "I'll bring them on the 1st. I slid the envelope into the drawer beside the visitor log and closed it. "All right." He stood at the newel post and touched the grain, the way people touch counters in kitchens they're considering. "The dock looks good," he said. "It does." He nodded toward the creek and back. "I appreciate the 2 weeks." "They're already counted," I said. He breathed once full, and then he hugged me. It was brief and without argument. A gull crossed low and wrote its white arc on the gray. That evening, Ruth and Walter came by with an apple pie whose heat showed up first as a smell and then as a weight through the foil. Walter set it on the counter and kept a hand on the lid as if it might take off. "We should have asked you first," he said. "You just did," I answered, and he let the lid go. Ruth looked around the sitting room like a woman collecting her bearings in a church she's known since childhood. Same windows, different light. "It feels like your place," she said, a little wonder tucked into the sentence. We cut the pie while it was still untidy and burned our tongues a little. They stayed for coffee. Conversation moved across weather and cousins and the new pilings. When they left, Walter tapped the doorframe once with his knuckle, a small benediction he's never named. After the house settled, I walked the dock at blue hour with a mug that cooled as fast as the air. The new boards answered underfoot with a different, younger sound. The creek had shrugged off the day's work and gone back to its slow industry tidal push reed. Whisper the hollow rattle of a crab pot somewhere in the bend. A skiff drifted by with no engine, only a man and an oar and the rhythm they'd agreed upon. I sat at the end, wrapped my hands around the cooling cup, and looked at what had been done and what had been kept. The pilings stood straight. The rope lay coiled like a sleeping thing. On the far bank, a light blinked on in Derek's kitchen and turned his window into a small square of story. When the cold reached my wrists, I stood and walked back, palm sliding along the rail I now knew by touch. At the door, the new deadbolt caught with its clean, unhesitating click. Inside the visitor log lay where I'd left it. Lines blank and ready for ordinary names. plumber, painter me. The house didn't say anything. It didn't need to. Out front, the tide kept time against the pilings. In the yard, the last orange flag lay forgotten in the grass. I turned off the lamp, and the room held the dark without protest, the kind you can live in, the kind that returns what you give it. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.